wanted to introduce, Alina, thank you to Alina for helping us coordinate the rest of her team. And we have, on the left, we have Liz Lee, who's the Director of Product Management. Say hi, Liz. Hello. And we have Megan Kirby McFarland, who is the Director of Growth Design for all your growth design needs right here. Hello. And Brian Vanaski, User Experience Designer. It's actually called a Staff User Experience Designer. You guys have interesting names. And of course, you guys know Alina, the Product Designer / UX Designer of Growth at LinkedIn. Question. So let's start with this. How did they come up with the titles for your jobs here? Because everybody, it's funny at like different companies. Some of them they go by experience designers, some of them are product designers. But I noticed the experience designers are more like product designers from my experience. Design, no.
So at LinkedIn, we're a full stack design team. So you do everything from the interaction design all the way through the visual design and motion, et cetera. So I think it's fair to say that everyone's a user experience designer. Titles like Brian's a staff are a signal of seniority. So those little monikers on the front. Interesting. And directors, that means we're like supposed to know what we're doing. So that's what that title means.
Well, as a director, let's start with you, Megan. And how did you become a director for growth design?
I also had a windy path. I'm a big fan of windy paths because I think design is everywhere and experiences are everywhere. So I actually studied architecture and urban design in college. Liz and I went to school at the same time at Stanford. We didn't know each other then, so it's fun now that we sit next to each other at work. And I wound my way through essentially cityscapes and landscapes, and then I ended up on Pages of Pixels. I became a UX lead. And then started leading the team when it was smaller. We were about maybe 5 to 6 people, and now we're 18 people across 2 continents. And I currently have 4 open headcount. So if you're interested in a role on LinkedIn Growth Design, follow up with me after.
Yeah, what kind of roles do you have?
Again, full stack experience design.
Okay.
A little more on the senior end. Yeah.
We're looking for all of you, whoever you may be. Okay. And let's talk a little bit with Liz about your background as a director of product management. Does that include design as well? Can you pass the mic to? Yeah, there you go.
So it doesn't include design. So Megan is one of my design partners. I'm very blessed to work with her. So maybe just a little bit more about how LinkedIn is organized. We're like what's called a matrixed org. And so we all work very closely together across different functions, but sort of product reports into product, design into design, et cetera.
Okay. But how do product management principles inform growth design?
So what's interesting, because we've had several conversations in the last couple of days about principles, they're very much related, right? So I think one of the things that is important as you're building any product, regardless of growth, is to have principles about what you believe sort of as a team about the product, how it should operate. Those are product principles, and maybe even within that, there might be design principles in terms of, what should the template look like, et cetera. A thing that I've been learning more is that it's very important to actually codify those principles, because I think a lot of time we discuss them, they're kind of in our head, but codifying them and using the same language and then communicating them within the team and across the team is just very helpful to get everybody on the same page and share the same language as you talk about things. But very relevant question given some of our recent conversations.
I have more questions for both of you, but we'll move on to Brian. And I want to hear more about your role as a UX designer on LinkedIn's growth team.
Yeah, so my role really is partnering with product and the overall organization. Like, how can we help fulfill our mission? And how can we always be solving a real problem? I think a lot of times design is always looking, is the problem we're trying to solve going to meet an actual need or not just moving a metric? And so a lot of times we're trying to bring that voice of the member into the work we do. And to kind of touch a little bit on those principles, we as designers, I think, like to bring those principles in, because as we're trying to solve problems for our members, it can get really tricky. It can be really hard to solve those problems. We try to return back to those principles as a foundation to make decisions. Are we heading down the right path? Have we made a wrong decision? And can our principles help guide us back to ultimately solving problems for our members? And so I spend a lot of my time trying to get the foundation of design right, our approach right, that then we can take that momentum and carry that into the actual pixel part of our work, which I actually think is probably the smallest part of like what I do at my role. Like that's like the fun part is like we figured out all the problems, what we're trying to do, what our goals are. Now we actually get to lay it out in Sketch or whatever tool you're using. And that's kind of like the byproduct of all that foundational work that I try to do when I kick off projects.
Nice. Awesome. And Alina, I have a question for you. So we talked a lot about quality and scaling the quality at LinkedIn. How do you and your team think about scaling quality?
Yeah, actually, this is something that's very relevant to us recently, and also just growth design in general. We do have to design for millions of users around the world, so quality is super important when it comes to accessibility as well. So knowing the rules of accessibility, really empathizing with people who might not have the same way of interacting with the product as you do. That's really baked into the design process, and we're trying to be very disciplined with how we design for people of all cultures and different abilities. So I think the rest of the team can also speak about this, but it's very in the process, and it's also in the way that we collaborate. So at every stage of our process, we need to be able to communicate with transparency and make sure we're checking all the boxes. So it's in the process, it's in the culture, it's in the actual product that we design.
Awesome. Now, I want to so LinkedIn is a huge company. I think you guys have like 160 million users or maybe more. How many users do you guys have?
670 million plus.
Just kidding. 670 million. I'm even thinking of another company. Another LinkedIn. No. How is the organization set up? Because there's so many different companies, but like a huge company like LinkedIn where you guys probably have offices around the world. How are you guys set up let's talk about maybe growth. How is growth set up within LinkedIn?
Really quickly, I wanted to address a little bit more about the scaling quality.
Okay,
yeah.
We'll rewind. Back
just for a second, just because I think it might be helpful for the folks in the room. Alina was specifically talking about accessibility. So we currently have a company-wide initiative to get everybody to grade C accessibility. Grade C doesn't sound all that great, but actually most products aren't there yet. So maybe don't think about it as your typical schoolhouse grading rubric. And then our design system. So all those accessibility principles are being baked in to the components that we're using. So when designers and engineers are plugging and playing with these things, that accessibility is already baked in. And then additionally, when it comes to speccing, we've implemented training by professional trainers for all designers within the organization across both our consumer and our enterprise side of the house. So that's one way in which we're trying to scale quality there. Another one that I think you guys might be interested in is we've recently had a project about essentially fixing the broken windows and creating better foundations for all of our experiences across LinkedIn. And so we started with user stories, like 31 user stories, and all of those user stories have at least 2+ teams that are associated with it. So rather than coming up from individual teams and doing projects that way, we're starting from the story level and then everyone collaborating, working together. So we're thinking more in flows instead of layouts. So those just might be some helpful tidbits for folks.
Yeah, no, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, that was part of the reason that article came about was because it was like in terms of accessibility, it seems to be an afterthought for a lot of people, but then you don't realize that accessibility equals usability. So you have to, there's more than one way to use the product, and just like that people have different ways of learning, there's different ways of using something, whether you're speaking or you're typing or they're reading it to you. It's like you need multiple inputs so that way you have the maximum amount of information comprehension. So anyway, that's my little side note, even though I'm here to interview you guys. I just wanted to throw that in. But no, okay, so let's so you scale quality with accessibility standards and also making sure that everybody is aligned with the North Star, correct? And how about the team operations? How do you guys get on the same page?
I've been talking a lot. Does someone else want to answer?
And pass it to Liz.
This is a question on how is LinkedIn organized, and
I was curious. Yeah, I was curious how you guys are organized and how you all work together.
So at a high level, so we have what we call sort of our at work team, which encompasses a lot of our monetization products or things, products that are used for people like sort of in their daily functional work. And then a team called Flagship, which is essentially like the consumer side. And growth rolls up into our Flagship org. It's one of like the pillars in the Flagship org. And as I mentioned earlier, we're sort of organized in product areas. So product, design, engineering, marketing, data science, BizOps, all your functions sort of work together, but sort of report into their own functions. And then around the world, we have lots of offices around the world. I don't remember the exact number. Most of the R&D, so like product, design, engineering, is in California, New York, and India. Am I missing anything? And then most of the other offices around the world are like sales and marketing offices, mostly to sell sort of our enterprise products.
Interesting. Okay. And I'm like, well, I kind of wanted to open it up to the audience because I know that you guys all have questions. Now, we have our friend here who has a microphone. Where is our first question? Yes, you guys. Oh, we have back there on the back. You get no, don't throw it. Yeah.
Be gentle.
Be gentle. I mean, I have a bunch of questions here, but I also think that the most like relevant questions come from the people who are asking them. So, besides myself, no.
Yep. Hi. So when growing a product like LinkedIn, I've noticed that, for example, in the mobile app, there's the LinkedIn Social Network, there's the LinkedIn Jobs app, and then there's the LinkedIn Learning app. How do you sort of make decisions to separate them into different categories?
Good question.
Sure. That's evolved over time. So actually the LinkedIn Jobs app, we are in the process of sunsetting, if not have already sunset. So yeah, it depends over time. I would say like a couple years ago, we were far more focused on having tons of different apps, like each app focused on one particular value proposition. I'd say over the last maybe like 2 years or so, I think we've realized that actually a lot of the things that you would want to do on LinkedIn, whether or not it's looking for a job or learning a new skill, is actually better served within what we call the Flagship app, the main sort of LinkedIn app, because all of these things, like what's in common about all of these things is that you tend to want to do it with the community, right? So looking for a job, most jobs I think are still found through like your network or through referrals. And the best way to facilitate that is within the main LinkedIn app. Even when you think about learning a skill, like I think Alina's story is a great example where she really looked towards this Cascade community to help her develop her UX skills. So we've learned a lot about how actually, even for these different value propositions, it's probably the best to have it be centralized in one, centralized and integrated in one main app, where like the community of people, that network, is really central and important.
Is LinkedIn Learning different than lynda.com, or are you guys evolving Lynda to be LinkedIn Learning?
Exactly.
Okay. I use Lynda all the time, by the way. They have the best classes. Well, LinkedIn Learning. I use LinkedIn Learning all the time. No, really, honestly, that accessibility class on LinkedIn Learning is fantastic. So if you guys want to learn the basics, yeah, okay. So.
No, I was just going to say, based on the learning and Liz's great example, I think you're going to start seeing more and more of post-acquisition of learning becoming more embedded into the app and sort of breaking down some of those multi-app strategy of those walls and creating that more of that flat community where these things can move together.
Oh, back there. There we go. Oh, we have 2 microphones.
Thank you. I just really want to know how you guys approach designing success metrics for growth, because I'm sure there are lots of different considerations for how growth and success look like.
Wow.
Liz has actually given a really great talk on quality growth. You can find it on YouTube under Liz Lee. I think I'll give my little pitch about when I'm talking to people about the growth design team in terms of how we used to do growth design and how that relates to success metrics versus how we do it now. And then maybe Liz can speak to sort of more of her insight from the product side. So back in the day, pre our time on the growth team, signups were a true north. Like, how many people can we get on the platform? The network effect is a really powerful one when it comes to growth. Those loops keep going. And then we have all these people here. But then what? What are they doing? Are they using it as a static Rolodex, or are they actually engaging and we're able to leverage value out of the platform? And so we've moved away from that as a North Star and looking at success metrics that are rooted in member value. So our core metrics now are much closer and are like signposts for how are people engaging? Are they getting value? And we've done a bunch of regression analysis on some of these to come back from people who are getting value and giving value to the platform. And then what are those things that make that up? And those are things we orient towards rather than some of these kind of vanity metrics around like how many people. Like I'm a little even embarrassed to sort of, 670 plus million members. That's less important than how many people are actually getting value out of the platform.
How do they get more value out of the platform? It's your turn.
I can maybe share a story. So I worked on the jobs team prior to coming over to the growth team. And one of the products that we have is called Open Candidates. And it allows anybody on LinkedIn to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm open for opportunities. And then recruiters on the platform can find those people that have raised their hand, that are looking for opportunities, and message them with job opportunities. And so we wanted to scale that initiative. And we were kind of around 3 million, and we were able to jump it up to 12 million people that were opted in. But what we learned really quickly is that this is a marketplace. And when you're trying to scale a marketplace, it's really important that you understand what both sides need. We had a lot of people that turned on the toggle to raise their hand, but those people weren't actually looking for jobs. And so when recruiters would reach out to them, they weren't responding. And so we had a really ineffective marketplace. And so we actually started to really care more about was the number of people responding to messages and how many of those messages were actually leading to confirmed hires. And one of the things with our growth strategy there was to actually decrease the number of people that were opted in who were no longer looking for work. So sometimes growth might mean shrinking for higher quality, because quality was better than quantity in this case. And so it was a really eye-opening stat for us to think differently about quality and leading against that signpost metric, which is confirmed hires.
Funny that you say that, because I have a friend who's actually speaking tomorrow, and on his LinkedIn, he says his job title is potato. And I think he put that because he didn't want recruiters like blindly reaching out to him. But I do notice less noise. Like, I'm an active LinkedIn user. I have like 8,600 connections on there, and I have my all-star profile. Like, I love LinkedIn. I've loved it for a long time because I can't really see the difference between my professional network and my personal network, because it's just, you're a business person. That's just how it is. But I do notice that there's a lot less noise since you guys added that feature. So thank you. Thank you for that. Now I have a question for Lena. And what is it like designing on the growth team at LinkedIn versus working at a startup?
I think it was quite similar, but also different. I know it's kind of a vague answer, but basically at a startup, the timing of the frequency of how fast you ship was much different, because you're designing for maybe, the target audience of maybe like, say 1,000 people, and they're very niche. They're probably bought in, and you're trying to also grow and collect more users who might be attracted to the value that you're marketing. So you're not really thinking about the things we're talking about, like accessibility or even like designing for other cultures and different languages. You're just trying to build a product that you want to bring that value up front, and you're constantly iterating. And also you're a team of, well, I was a team of one for 2 years, so I didn't really have to collaborate and do a lot of these cross talks with other teams. But at LinkedIn, there's so many different teams. There's a lot of things happening. We're all trying to collaborate at the same time and be innovative. And so what's really great is that we have a culture of collaboration, and everyone's dedicated to a specific area, but we have our design systems teams to also kind of bring it all together, where they are kind of owning like the accessibility or even like inclusive design, where checking if we're writing the copy that's not excluding people. People feel like they belong in this app. And we also have teams dedicated to checking a word across different languages, and that's like our internationalization team. We have our engineers who are dedicated to like the infrastructure user experience, and so we can get plugged into all these different teams that are specialized, and making sure that that is also like quality up to their quality standards before we ship. So the process is a lot longer, but then the quality is a lot higher, and the impact is bigger.
That's awesome. Okay, we have time for one more question. We have microphones up here. How about you go at the same time? 1, 2, 3.
I have a question regarding what type of skills you guys assess in candidates when you're hiring for growth, and is there a recipe for success on building a growth team? Like, is it like design, data, engineering? How would you define a successful growth team?
Yeah, really
two
good
questions,
question. Yeah,
Awesome question.
and I would love for other folks on here, because we hire as a team, right? We interview, we go to presentations together, we see everything. So if I'm missing anything, anybody chime in. Skill set wise, Alina was talking a lot about all the collaboration that's needed. So one of the biggest things I look for is someone who is a reflexive systems thinker and is reflexively collaborative, so they can see the forest for the trees. LinkedIn is if you've had a chance to poke around, it's like its own little universe, right? There's a lot going on. And if we want to be creating coherent and consistent user experiences, like we all need to be, first you need to see it, and then you've got to figure out who to talk to make it happen. So I think that's the biggest one, in addition to all the fundamental core skill sets that we would expect out of a user experience designer. And I think one of the important things on growth is to have an understanding of the business and to have a sense of I'm personally a big fan of loops over funnels, being able to talk quality growth and speak, and I love Liz, PMEs, so we can all get up on the same page. Those, I think, are core skills. I think if you treat the design as perhaps too precious and we're only caring about, and not that any of you would, but only how it looks or the delight that's in it versus what is that long-term value that we're delivering, and what's the way that we can amplify that across the platform, because we're a social network and there's so much interconnectivity there. So someone who can think in those terms and apply their design to thinking about these problems at scale. That's what I look for.
How about you, Liz? What do you look for when you're hiring a candidate, whether a designer, product manager, user researcher for the growth team?
Yeah, I would +1 to Megan's comment about thinking about the ecosystem. That's actually when we hire product managers, not just for growth, but across LinkedIn. That's one of the key things that we look at, is whether or not you're an ecosystem thinker. And I do think that is maybe slightly more specific or differentiated for LinkedIn, because I think even through, and super clearly from Brian's story about the Open Candidates product, LinkedIn is a ecosystem that has sort of marketplaces across everything, right? Like job seekers to recruiters, advertisers to people who are, using the feed and viewing the ads. And so it's really important to understand the work that you're doing, the product that you're working on, the impact that it can have somewhere else in the ecosystem. And so we want people, regardless of what function they're in, to be able to think that way. And then maybe the growth piece of that is to not just think that way, but to put structure around it in a way where you can analyze that funnel or that loop, or understand sort of, if I make this change here, how big of a change is it going to make somewhere else? But yeah, so I mean, fairly similar. I think the things that we look for across different functions that are just on top of that specific functional skill.
And I'm gonna ask this question across the board here. So Alina, what do you look for because I'm sure that when you're going to hire somebody, you have to evaluate them. You're like, do they make a good fit on the team? What kind of person do you like to work with?
I feel like someone who I can learn from, and I like to work with nice people. I think everyone at LinkedIn has been so just easy to work with, and has an attitude of just being open and transparent and being able to, communicate their thoughts, being open to feedback. I don't know.
Brian, can you add to that as well?
Yeah, I like to work with people based on how they think. At the end of the day, like, how do you approach problems? How do you articulate those problems? At the end of the day, we can learn skills fairly easy. Like, I've only been on the growth team for a few weeks, but you can pick up those skills with that adaptive mindset. Like, I can learn that, but it's really like how you think and how you approach. When I'm interviewing candidates, I really dig into their thought process and approach and realize that we have a lot of tools at LinkedIn to help build skill over time. So that's what I'm looking for.
That's awesome. Yeah. I think that's it, right? Yeah. All right. So give it up for the LinkedIn growth team.